What's the biggest difference between living in Colombia and living in Denmark?
I mean, Denmark, it's a high trust society, and Colombia is the exact opposite of that. Nobody shows up on time. Nobody trusts each other. Insecure. But I think the hardest part to come here, understanding what it means to live in a low trust society.
The future for Europe right now looks very bleak. But then I look at a society like Denmark, and you just mentioned all these high taxes, but somehow it's kind of working. You got like extreme right and extreme left from US perspective policies going on in Denmark. Super high taxes, and again, it just somehow works.
There is a saying, it's okay for the widest shoulders to carry the biggest burden. Danish people are okay with contributing more in taxes if you're earning more in order to benefit the overall society.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Adventure Capitalist Podcast. My name is Austin Bronner, and I'm here with my co-host, as always, Cody Shirk. And we are very, very excited because we have a guest today, a longtime friend of Cody's. And so I want to turn it over to Cody to do a little intro here and welcome Patrick to the show.
So Patrick Spanfelner, one of my best buddies, travel mate, adventure buddy, whatever you want to call it. We've explored the world together. We have a really, really fun episode because we're going to dive into Patrick's personal life, which is, I mean, he exemplifies the adventure capitalist ethos and more than almost anybody I know. And what I mean by that is somebody who goes out in the world, discovers things, but also then actually does things in other countries, builds businesses, interacts with the locals, learns different languages, has citizenship, all those things. So we're going to dive into that. We're also going to tell some pretty funny, crazy travel stories. But I want to first mention how Patrick and I met. This is how long ago, Patrick? A decade ago? More.
Yeah, just about 2014-ish.
So we met online on this basically like way where people connect over different topics. And I had always wanted to travel to Cali, Colombia. I grew up in California. When I was a little kid, I'd look at this city called Cali when I was a little kid in Colombia. And I was like, I want to go there someday because it sounded like California. You know, when I became of age to travel, 18, 19, Cali, Colombia was the most dangerous city in the world. And of course, that kind of piqued my interest even more. Like, I want to go check this place out. Fast forward several more years, and I meet you online, and you're living in Cali, Colombia. And within like 2 weeks, you invite me to your house. And your wife was like, what? You met somebody online who's going to come to your house? Like, what are you doing, Patrick? And I went down to Colombia, and we hit it off, and the rest is history. But why don't you tell us really quickly your professional background, what you're doing in Cali, Colombia right now, and then we'll dive into the personal stuff.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me on the show. I'm a big fan. But yeah, I think the origin of the story starts in Denmark, right? I was born and raised in Denmark. My mother's Danish, Viking, pure blood, and my father's an American. And he met my mom in Greece when he was backpacking around Europe, doing the Euro railing thing. And he met my mom one night in a bar, and he invited her to the beach the next day. And she didn't know it was a nudist beach, and he didn't bring a towel. And I think I was conceived about a couple of days after that. And my father moved to Denmark and has been there ever since 1983 or so. I was born in 84 and basically grew up in small town Denmark. My parents have a restaurant. They still have it to this day. My little brother runs it. And I grew up in the city of, or born in Odense, which is, Denmark is full of islands, but it's on one of the big islands where Hans Christian Andersen comes from, the Ugly Duckling, if you've ever heard that story. And we moved to a small town called Vejle. And Vejle is not very famous, but right next to Vejle is a small city called Billund, where Lego was invented, a toy, which I'm sure all of you have played with Lego at some stage in your life. So that's where I grew up. I think a lot of Danish people after high school are very encouraged to go travel the world. And I did the same thing. So when I was about 18, 19, 20, it's basically out traveling the world, back, earn some money, back and forth. And we did that, or I did that first with an ex-girlfriend and with a couple of friends. And it just became kind of a habit. And I did all of Southeast Asia, I did Australia, bought a car, drove around, did Hong Kong, Japan, did parts of Africa, did Central America, traveled across the United States. And it gets addictive, as anybody who has traveled a lot can tell. And at the time when I was about 24, one of my friends proposed that we were going to do a trip from Denmark to Cape Town on a motorcycle. And I was game on. Let's do this.
So that would have been all the way through Africa, basically.
Yeah, basically all the way down through Spain, cross over to Morocco.
All the way down.
All the way down. And it was inspired in no small part by, I don't know if you've heard of Ewan McGregor and Charlie Bourne.
Oh, yeah.
This motorcycling trip down. Yeah, exactly. My friend was living in Uganda at the time. So that was the plan. We were going to do that. And he had business obligations, and last minute he sort of canceled, and it didn't happen. So what I did was like, whoa, I told everybody I'm going on this trip, and all of a sudden it's canceled. My mom was freaking out. It's like, Patrick, you're not going through Africa by yourself on a motorcycle. You're going to get yourself killed. It's like, oh. So like, okay, let's do Latin America instead. Not that Latin America is any less dangerous. I mean, the top 50 most dangerous cities in the world, I think 49 of them are in Latin America. But my parents had a Mexican restaurant. We traveled a lot in Mexico when I was a child. It was like the one location where you could deduct it as a business expense. And so we always went to Mexico, and I always wanted to learn Spanish. So it's like, okay, my father has family in Georgia. That would be an easy place to fly over, title and register a motorcycle in Florida, and then zigzag my way through the United States, and then did the same thing through Central America, all the way down to Brazil. And it became a long trip. So I went on, started alone this trip, a little bit intimidating, 24 years old. And it ended up becoming a 15-month-long trip, 36,000 miles, 54,000 kilometers is what, 18 different countries. And of course, that is what for me at the time was a life-changing adventure, of course. I traveled initially alone, met people online. You meet people at border crossings, and some of them turned into lifelong friendships. And the reason I ended up in Colombia was that my last night in Cali, I met a girl out in the salsa bar, dancing around, and the next, me being the poor backpacker that I was, invited her into my dorm room late at night, and she said, "Hell no, I'm not sleeping in nobody's dorm room." There are like 6 other dudes sleeping in the bunk beds surrounding my bed, and that was basically it. I thought, okay, whatever. It was fun. We kissed, we danced, and then the next day, I kind of jumped on my bike and continued south towards the Ecuadorian border. Ecuadorian border. And got an email a couple of days later. This girl reached out, "Hey, whereabouts are you?" This was before WhatsApp. And I think she had what was this thing? Everybody had this dial thing on their phone. I'm forgetting the name of it now.
BlackBerry?
Yeah, exactly. That was what she was using back in the day. And I told her, "Sorry, I've already left." And Jessica, who's my wife today, it's like, too bad. Isn't there anywhere we can meet up again? It's like, well, Lima, maybe. And she ended up flying out to Lima. 2 weeks later, bought a ticket, and ended up riding with me on a motorcycle all the way down to Cusco, which was about 10, 12 days. She flew back home. 5 months later, we meet up again in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. End up traveling together for about 3.5 weeks, more or less. Then she went home. I sold my motorcycle, went to Carnival without her. Didn't get many points for that one. And returned to university. I'd kind of taken a sabbatical in between.
Returned to Denmark, right?
Returned to Denmark, exactly. And had to finish the last 2 years at university. And the following summer, let's say Carnival was in February-ish. So in around June, July, Jessica was traveling around Europe. She sent me a message saying, "Hey, I'm in Paris. Anyway, I'd come meet you in Denmark." I was like, Denmark's so boring. And I had my own little group of girls up there, and didn't really want company in Denmark. I was like, okay, where can we fly? I was kind of a poor student at the time. So we have Ryanair, which is the equivalent of, what would that be? Like
Spirit, Southwest.
Spirit Airlines,
kind
exactly.
of. There's not much of an equivalent. It's even cheaper
Greyhound
than anything
bus.
we got here. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The one destination we had in common. So me flying out of Milan and her flying out of Paris with a city called Trapani in Sicily. And that's where we met, rented a car, drove around for 3 weeks, ended our trip in Rome. And she continued up to Venice. I continued to France to meet a friend. And about 2-3 weeks later, I got an email. I was working at my dad's restaurant while studying at the university. And I got an email that Jessie was pregnant. And I almost choked on my beer sitting around with all my coworkers around the table after work. It was like, ooh. That was a hard one. And Denmark, being the liberal country that we are, lobbied hard for an abortion, which didn't happen. And then all of a sudden I figured, like, you know what? I traveled the world. By that time, I was 26, 27. I traveled around the world. I'd been to more than 50 different countries. And, I felt like no child should grow up without the father because the father didn't have the desire to participate in its life. So called Jessie, apologized, offered her to come to Denmark and give birth as a plan B for our child. And she came in the middle of the winter with her mom and gave birth. I finished university and we moved to Colombia. And that was in August 2013. So that was a very long story condensed into a couple of minutes.
No, I mean, there's so many offshoots of that story that we can dive into it, which is, what we can dive into in a little bit here. But right now you're in Cali, Colombia.
Yeah.
You're running a business. You obviously have your wife, Jess. You now have two daughters, two beautiful daughters. You're doing the whole family man routine, but also in a different, strange country. Well, it's not strange for you anymore. So what are you doing? What's your business right now? And what's that all about?
Okay, so there's essentially two businesses. There is a property development business where we receive money from international investors and develop vacation rental properties. So in other words, properties destined to put on Airbnb, so to speak. So we buy the asset or we buy the piece of land, we contract the architects, we supervise the construction, we furnish the project, and then we have our other business, which is essentially a property management business with 115 apartments and a couple of rural properties, vacation rental properties. And we administrate it on a daily basis, pay all the bills, customer service, before, during, after check-in, maintenance of the properties, pay out profits, all that kind of thing.
And you're you're the highest rated property management company in Colombia. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're the highest rated one. There's a couple of hosts that are a little bit bigger. There's some in Medellin, some in Cartagena. They have more doors, so to say, but they don't have the same average scores we have. So out of about 6,600 reviews, we have a 4.93 or 4.94, which is pretty solid. I mean, we're the biggest operator on the vacation rental market in Southwest Colombia and the best rated one in the whole country.
So for you, growing up in Western Europe, growing up in Denmark, and now residing in Colombia, in Cali for the last 15 years, it sounds like about. 12 years. What's the biggest difference between living in Colombia and living in Denmark that people wouldn't normally think about?
So there's a couple of them. I mean, Denmark, for people that haven't been there, it's basically like Switzerland. Everything runs like a clock. Everybody shows up on time. It's a high trust society. And Colombia is the exact opposite of that. So nobody shows up on time. Nobody trusts each other. It's insecure. It's tropical. It is, warm all year round. There's so many different things. But I think the hardest part to come here, apart from learning the language and so forth, is understanding what it means to live in a low trust society. Meaning you get vetted in every single business transaction. Nobody trusts each other from the get-go. People, they do title histories on properties here to figure out if that money has ever been touched by somebody, that have been in contact with narco deals or guerrilla money or whatever it may be. So I think that is the hardest part. And then dealing with the insecurity at all times. You're always looking out for yourself. You're always, trying to protect yourself against scam, trying to protect yourself against robbery. And it sounds bad, but there are certain ways you can avoid it easily. There are certain parts of the city that are more dangerous than others. But it gets tiring and frustrating, especially in the beginning when you're not used to it.
What about the best part?
So the best part, somebody like Cody would say it's the climate. Like he loves this all year summer, basically warm, tropical. People are enormously friendly. So Colombia is a big country, just like the not as big as the United States. But what I want to say is that New Yorker is very different from a person living in Atlanta. And we're considered kind of like the Southerners. So people are very warm-blooded, very friendly, very open here. The cost of living is incredible, especially for somebody who makes dollars, so to speak. And certain things are expensive compared to the salaries down here. But as a rule of thumb, compared to living in Miami or Austin or New York or Chicago, where I think most of your audience might be located, this is a very, very cost-efficient place. It is a place where you can afford many luxuries that you may not be able to afford in Europe or North America, meaning we have a domestic employee. It sounds bad, but it is a reality for, I'd say, any single family who could afford it here would have domestic helpers. It means you don't fight over who's going to walk the dog, who's going to do the laundry, who's going to be cooking tonight, who's going to clean the house. So that is a tremendous luxury. And I know people here that have drivers, gardeners. I mean, basically like Billionaires Row in Miami. You can live that lifestyle to a certain degree when you're here and have some sort of a decent income. And when I say a decent income, I mean, if you're making $3,000 or $4,000 a month, you can easily afford this type of a lifestyle.
But Colombia is not all like tropical, hot, steamy. When we just climbed a mountain last month, Patrick and I did this mountain. So in a couple episodes ago, I explained how I went on this Colombia expedition, and Patrick was one of the bros I went on the hike with. And I think Colombia is one of the countries that has the most diverse amounts of environment, meaning they have high mountains with snow, they have desert, there's jungle, there's like every biodiverse area you can think of is all in Colombia. So yes, you think of warm tropical because you think it's near the equator, but Colombia's actually got a lot of things going for it. And I know, we've been all over the country, Patrick, exploring different areas. And I think that's one thing that a lot of Westerners, especially in the US, overlook, that Colombia's got this incredible amount of resources to go explore. And that's, I know, what you enjoy almost every weekend, going on your dirt bike and checking things out.
Yeah, no, 100%. So Colombia, I think along with Brazil, is the most mega diverse place on the planet, meaning there's so much you can do and there's so much you can see in a relatively small area. I mean, you can fly from north to south in like 2-3 hours. So it's not that big geographically, even though it feels very big when you're here because the roads aren't as good and the roads are, twisty turns everywhere you go. And it takes what is like 250 miles, takes about 10 hours to drive, depending on where you are. But that's, the region where I am. So there's a ton of stuff you can do. You got deserts, you got jungles, you got access to 2 oceans. You got the mountains, you got the rivers, you got some of the most fertile farmland, and of course it's abundant in natural resources like gold, silver, emeralds, you name it. So yeah, basically. And one thing I forgot to add when we were talking about the difficulties of living here, I think one thing is being a digital nomad, which can be fairly easy, but if you're working on the ground like I am, and you're hiring local people, like working with the labor laws and understanding all of the red tape, getting construction permits, getting permits to lay your sewage system under the roads, all that kind of stuff. It's just a lot of paperwork. And I think that will drive a lot of people crazy if they don't understand the culture, if they don't have some partner here on the ground that they can trust, and if they don't speak the language.
Super interesting. One of the reasons that we want to have you on this show is that to add a different perspective. And there's a lot of changes going on in Western Europe right now. There's a lot of shifts in Western Europe and North America in terms of politics. And one of the biggest, most recent shifts has been a push towards the right. There's been many far right parties that are winning elections in European democracies, especially since around like 2010. It's been a steady shift up, reaching almost 25% of the vote share by party type in 2025. One interesting caveat to that is what's happening in Denmark. Denmark has been the opposite. There's been kind of a center-left party, the Social Democrats, that are continued to be in power and be very successful. There's an interesting article that came out titled "In an Age of Right-Wing Populism, Why Are Denmark's Liberals Winning?" And we want to talk a little bit about this article because it outlines why they have been able to succeed where in other countries, the far right party has won. And I want to give a little bit of context on this, and then we'll kind of dive into what is happening. So one notable difference between the Social Democrats in Denmark and some of if you think of like the West and think about the United States and the progressive Democrats, is that Social Democrats in Denmark are a lot more strict on immigration. And I'm interested from your perspective, right? You are Danish, living in Colombia. Why do you think that the Social Democrats in Denmark have been so successful when a lot of the other parties have lost? The like left-wing parties in Europe have lost and have been losing their share of votes towards the far right.
Okay, so it's a very big and very loaded question, so to speak. But I haven't lived there for 12 years. Let's clarify that. But I'm not in that shitstorm of politics and news every single day, like some of my.
Yeah, but you grew up in the community, the culture, and you understand it in a level that we as Americans don't.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to know.
Yeah, the Social Democrats have traditionally been the biggest party in Denmark. Like in all my youth, it was always the biggest party. But there's 16 different political parties in Denmark, and it's a small country of, a little bit shy of 6 million people. So there's an enormous range of parties to choose from. And some of them, what we would consider right-wing would probably be more sort of center-left for Americans, because that's just the whole European mentality, so to say. But the Social Democrats, even though the prime minister right now is a Social Democrat, she does not sit and control the whole government by herself. So she had to enter into a coalition, and she had to enter into a coalition with some of the more center and center-right parties. So the only ways that she could hold the majority and control the government was by entering into this coalition. So I think they sit on about 93 seats out of 180 something seats in the government. And I think one of the compromises that she had to make in order to maintain the control of the government was to tighten up the immigration policy. And I think that is one of the reasons that you've seen Denmark over the last 4 or 5 years tightening their policies on the subject. And I just read this morning that they only allowed last year about 890 asylum seekers into the country, which is historically low compared to Germany that has just Turks. This has gone on over a long range of years, but just Turks, there are more than 5 million Turks in Germany, to put that into context.
Yeah, one of the things that was striking from the article, and I'm going to read a couple of stats here that I found to be very interesting. So today, 12.6% of the population in Denmark is foreign-born, up from 10.5% when Frederiksen took office in, I think it was 2019. I think it's when she took office. In Germany, the share is almost 20%. So your point of Germany absorbing a lot more asylum seekers. And in Sweden, it's even higher than 20%.
Yeah.
I'll pull out a couple other interesting things from that article that I thought were fascinating. So one, in 2019 is when the Social Democrats kind of reclaimed power, what you're talking about. And that's when they shifted to tighten the immigration policy. And, when we think about a progressive Democrat in the U.S., typically you think of more of a let's just say open borders or pro-immigration policy, where if you look at what's going on in Denmark, they've actually strengthened border checkpoints with Germany and Sweden to prevent people without EU citizenship from even entering. There's checks on, your point about 800 asylum seekers is very, very low. And they even have a quite controversial policy where it's called the Parallel Societies Law, which I had not heard of before. It basically will evaluate neighborhoods based on 5 categories: employment, crime, educational progress, welfare rates, and the percentage of residents with non-Western backgrounds. And if a neighborhood fares poorly on 2 of these 4 metrics and has at least 50% non-Western residents, the authorities will step in to spur cultural integration, including encouraging people to move to the community. And then if those efforts fail, they actually can tear down some of the housing and gentrify the neighborhood. Which, if you were to compare this, you talked a little bit about even the policies in Denmark, even the center left, or even like the right wing being left. This would be so far right in the U.S., a policy of encouraging gentrification. So it struck me that my biggest takeaway from the article was that they're running a economic left wing policy with almost a Steve Bannon-esque position on immigration and as well as cultural integration and protecting like the workers within Denmark. So it's very fascinating.
And real quick, Patrick, before you jump in here, because you're the expert, but I want to put this into context, because as we're speaking, the news we're getting in the US about Europe is that Europe's falling apart. There's no creativity, super high taxes. The tariff war is going to like maybe significantly hurt certain countries. There's like unrestricted immigration, specifically from the Middle East and Africa, coming into Europe, and Europe's more or less being invaded. So this narrative that we're receiving, especially as investors and travelers in the US, is like, oh my God, Europe is falling apart. And then Austin, what you articulated, that's not the case. And in Denmark's case, this is a society that as Americans, we don't really understand really well because it just operates differently, but somehow Denmark works. And I guess that's what I really want to find out, like how it works. And you being kind of this person that straddles Colombia, Denmark, and the US, I think you have a unique perspective on how to tell us to look at Denmark and parts of Europe in a different way than we're being told in the media right now.
Yeah. Again, many ways to approach this, but just to talk about how the society works. So post-World War II, some reforms are passed to create what is known as the welfare state, just simplifying this, meaning we're going to tax our residents, our citizens very, very hard, but we're going to equalize the society, and we're going to promise a lot of benefits to the future generations, meaning the first people that paid into the system never really got to enjoy these benefits. It came later on. So it's been a long vision, something that they've been building on for 50, 60, 70 years. One part that is very important is that Denmark is a high trust society. And there is a saying where they have, that we have in Denmark, where they say it's okay for the widest shoulders to carry the biggest burden, meaning Danish people are okay with contributing more in taxes if you're earning more in order to benefit the overall society. So I think Denmark is a very collectivist mindset. It's very, I wouldn't say, yeah, it is socialist. It's one of the few places where socialism might even work, but it is very collectivist in this form of thinking. And like I could talk to my mom about this and she would say, yeah, Patrick, but we are the ones that can, and that's the reason we should. You know, and that is very much like she thinks in the greater good before she thinks of herself. Where I think the United States and many other economies around the world, they're more individualist. They think more about themselves before they think of society as a whole. So, but taxes in Denmark are pretty insane, at least from an American point of view. And just to give you a couple of examples, like marginal income tax can hit 55%, personal income tax. Corporate tax is 22%. Dividend tax up to about $10,000 is 27%. Anything above that is 42%. Sales tax is 25%. We have up to 180% taxes on vehicles. Then you have an ongoing annual tax depending on how much carbon emissions that your vehicles are letting out. We have inheritance taxes that range from 15 to 36%. We have taxes on livestock depending on how much CO2 emissions that they emit. So it's taxes everywhere you go. And people have traditionally been okay with that. And I think right now, and one of the reasons that the Social Democrats are being forced to reanalyze their stance on immigration is that when you have a small city or a small country with a little less than 6 million people, and you have about 10% of them, meaning about 600,000 people that come from what they call a non-Western background, which means mostly the Middle East, they're very, very hard to integrate into society. They have a different view on societal norms. They have a different view on women. They have a different view on work. They have a different view on the perception of time. They have a different view on, let's say, business dealings and so forth. And that has been creating some issues in society. And I think the Danes are okay with paying a lot of taxes to take care of the Danes. But now it's not just the people from the Middle East. Now they're also receiving thousands and thousands of people from Ukraine. And I think that they feel that their society is becoming burdened by these extra what do you call it? Challenges that come when you allow so many people to integrate into society. So I think that was probably just part of the answer that you're looking for.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's not like we're looking for an answer specifically. We're actually genuinely curious because I look at Denmark. I know you personally very well, and I know that in general, you're freedom-minded. I mean, you literally moved across the world for an adventurous lifestyle, but the way you're raised, like I was raised in America, right? I have much more of like a freedom, open spaces, kind of take care of yourself, survival of the fittest type mindset. And Denmark's a tiny country, literally tiny compared to the US in land size, but also population size. So you just naturally think different, right? You think, oh, I've got to take care of my neighbor more because we're more dependent on each other. Our borders are smaller. We don't have as much land to expand to. It's like it really shapes the person you become when you're a child. And I know for you are able to straddle that. And again, as I look at Europe right now, it's like uninvestable or the future for Europe right now looks very bleak. But then I look at a society like Denmark, and you just mentioned all these high taxes, but somehow it's kind of working in a weird way. And Austin, you mentioned you compared Steve Bannon. It's like you got like extreme right and extreme left from U.S. perspective policies going on in Denmark, super high taxes. And again, it just somehow works. And I wonder, maybe is that something investors and people in the U.S. are overlooking that works in Europe? And I don't know if it does,
or is it
if there
just
will be a
specifically
future.
Denmark?
True.
It is a small country. They have enormous social benefits, things that you won't see in the other places. So when you're a child, you get subsidized healthcare, or not what you call childcare. You get free healthcare for life, even though some companies do pay for a private health insurance in order so you skip the line if you have some sort of a pressing emergency. You go to university for free. You go to any of the trade schools for free. You get paid to study about $800-900 per month once you're older than 18. So one of the theses behind this is that Denmark doesn't have the natural resources that Colombia or the United States has. So we've always said we invest in the brains, and that's why Denmark needs to be a well-educated workforce, and we need to, stimulate or incentivize a very well-educated workforce. So, and then they care deeply about their work-life balance, meaning that the Danish work week is 37 hours. It's not uncommon for people in the Danish summers, which are very, very long. The sun gets up at 4 o'clock and sets at around 11 p.m. People meet on the beach in the summer, play ball, jump in the water, catch crabs on a Wednesday night and barbecue and have fun. So they're very, being together, you have this term called hygge, where being together as either as a family or with your closest friends is very, very important. Another example of that is salaries are very, very high, not compared to Americans, but if you're contracting somebody, if you're calling the plumber, if you're calling the electrician, if you're calling professional help, you could easily pay like $150 an hour for those services. So what Danes are very good at is helping each other out. Like if I'm moving, I call a friend and he calls a friend, and all of a sudden 6 guys show up and they help us fill the trailer, and I buy pizzas and beers and everybody's happy. So they're very good at helping each other out. And yeah, there is a very strong social tissue, I think would be the expression that most fits this system. But it works because it's small. It works because it's dense, meaning that the cities are very compact. We can walk around. We get good public transportation. You got to see it to believe it.
Totally. Well, what are your thoughts on, one of the challenges of a system where you pay it forward is that it requires on a birth rate that continues to add younger, productive members of society. I say productive. It's not that people, as they get older, aren't valuable to the society. They just don't happen to create as much like taxable value. Mm-hmm. And that money goes to the older people. Are there fears in Denmark related to the lower birth rate and the ability to sustain the welfare benefits as the population ages?
Oh, for sure. And we're seeing it right now. Like they're increasing the retirement age. So everybody is on a government. You can have private pensions, but there's also public pension schemes. And they keep increasing the age for retirement. Yep. And one of the reasons is just like Social Security in the United States, that they're worried about, is it going to be able to fund the future generations? So yeah, no, absolutely. That's an issue.
I think Elon got a lot of flack because he talked about Social Security as somewhat of a Ponzi scheme. And, the idea, what he was saying was that you pay in when you're young, you pay, with the expectation that when you're older, you'll be paid back. And his argument is that we're at a point where the debt obligations are going to be so much more than the ability to put in. I see, when I read the article and I kind of learned a little bit more about what they're doing there, I see it as kind of my perspective is that it's the future of where the Democratic Party in the U.S. is probably going to go. And you're seeing some shifts right now, some cracks in the, let's just say the organization, I believe, of the Democrats in the U.S. You've got certain people that are coming out and they're sharing a different message. One person who's been leading that is Rahm Emanuel, former chief of staff of Obama, former mayor of Chicago. He went on Bill Maher a couple weeks ago and was talking about how effectively most of the blue cities in the U.S. are being run very poorly. There's high crime, they're in debt, it's less appealing to live. And he talks about how when he was a mayor, one of his, everything he came back to, he had a saying, it's safe streets, strong schools, and stable finances, right? Those are the things that lead people to be happy in their environment. He had another quote that I thought was very interesting. He said, I don't want to hear anything more about the bathrooms until I hear about the classrooms. Meaning, let's not talk about who can use the men's and women's bathrooms. Let's talk about the fact that, to your point with Denmark, I think it's 2/3 of 8th graders aren't reading at an 8th grade level anymore. And what's our plan to solve the issues in the classroom? And my take from learning more about what's going on in Denmark is that it seems like the focus has maintained and stayed on, let's keep the streets safe. Let's make sure our schools are strong. Let's make sure we have stable finances. And at the same time, keep our progressive values.
Yeah, no, it sounds about right. It is like when I was living there, I must admit that it is hard to envision yourself paying into a scheme for 40 years and then hoping that they don't change the law and that you're going to receive the equal benefit as the ones that are currently receiving those. My grandmother is one of them. So she has a private pension, she has a public pension, and she lives in a house that costs, let's say, $2,500 to rent a month. And she probably gets about $1,500 of those as a government subsidy. So it's just like thinking she's one lady. And with the demographics, the way that they look right now, it is very, very hard to see that they're going to be able to keep that up going forward. So one thing that I know has financed retirement, meaning a quality retirement for a lot of Danes, is their home equity, meaning access to financing has been extremely cheap for many, many years. And during COVID or pre-COVID, the bonds that financed the market for real estate in Denmark went negative. So you could essentially buy a house and have negative interest rates on it, which is something that's completely warped and completely unheard of. They also charged you interest rates on your savings accounts in the banks, like they're trying to stimulate the economy. But what happens is that when you have such low interest rates, is that it forms a bubble in real estate. And I know a friend, one of my very good friends, he's a barista in Copenhagen. And he's sitting in a house that's $1.5 million. And it's like, how could you afford that? Well, the reason is that he's been living in Copenhagen for many years and bought an apartment for $200,000, held onto it for 5 years, refinanced it or sold it, big capital gains, bought another one, did it again. And then all of a sudden he can make $1 million down payment on a fancy house out in the suburbs. And eventually he's going to retire and he's going to have $1 or $2 million in home equity value, so to speak. He's going to sell it, and that's going to be what eventually fuels his, or at least what gives him a good quality retirement. And I think a lot of Danish people are relying on their home equity for a quality retirement.
Where do you think things go for Denmark and for Europe? What are some of the changes that you see coming that maybe we wouldn't have the same perspective as you, not being Europeans?
That's a hard question. I think, I don't think Denmark, let's say the Danish people believe in the model that they have, but I think they find it very hard to believe. And it's not just Denmark, by the way. Norway is more or less on the same model. Sweden is more or less on the same model. Finland is more or less. Iceland is more or less on the same model. So the whole Scandinavian, I wouldn't call it continent, but the whole Scandinavian group of countries believe in the same system, so to speak. I don't see it changing dramatically in the near future. There are always going to be a small minority that is yelling that migration's too high, taxes are through the roof, but it's been that way for my entire life, where we don't really see the changes. Like me saying, okay, I would probably be a little bit more on the right wing. I would like for lower taxes. I would like for more pro-business environment. But the fact is that the business environment is pretty pro-business. It's easy to fire people. If you fire people, they get government subsidies. So there is incentive. And I think 22% corporate tax is lower than Colombia's 35% corporate tax. So there is incentive to keep business growing. And I think one thing that also applies to the United States, what they really should do if they want to immigrate, and I know there are laws in place to do it, but maybe they should pursue it more aggressively, is try to attract more high talent people for the workforce. And that way ensure the growth of the economy so that they can, ensure the what do you call it? The income to support the welfare state for the future. So I think that's the way things are going to go, but I don't see it changing in the near future per se. Of course, if all of a sudden a war breaks out in Europe, Russia attacks Germany, I mean, then things could change in a heartbeat, of course. I don't see that happening. Of course, I could be wrong. But I see the Danish system being pretty solid. And also, it's a very small economy. So I think it's easier to control than a U.S. empire or a Colombian society or an African economy where, at least in Latin America and Africa and in many parts of Asia, trust is very, very low. Even in Eastern Europe and Southern Europe, trust is very low, but trust in Denmark and trust in their leaders in Denmark is very, very high.
Well, I think that's kind of states it most obvious from a macro perspective. You can have a society that has all these services where people are paying into it if everyone trusts each other, right? Because that's the whole point of taking a service, is that you're using it for the right means and you're paying into it some other way. If you have a low trust society, obviously people are going to abuse it. And that's more or less what we're struggling with around the world, especially in the US, which is, are we going to have all these services, but also have people abusing it? Or are we going to have no services, very low services and low taxes, and not have to worry about people abusing it, because you can't abuse it. And of course, we'll see what happens in the future. But I guess that's kind of the crux of the matter here, which is it works in Denmark because you have super high trust and a somewhat similar population. As soon as you have massive immigration with different morals and different beliefs, that gets disrupted. And that's why Denmark shut it down. And that's happening in the US and it's happening in many countries. Look at Canada. Canada is probably a prime example of that. Their government finances are out of control, but they've also had the highest immigration ever over the past several years, which has been completely disrupting their system of high trust and all these government services. So we shall see, I guess.
One of the big things in the news is Trump talking about Greenland, right? Like wanting to integrate Greenland into the U.S. one way or another, right? Trying to attract people in Greenland. Greenland is what is the context of it? Is it owned by Denmark?
No, so it's not owned by Denmark per se, or maybe it is, depending on how you define it. But it's part of the Danish kingdom. So Denmark, Faroe Islands, and Greenland is the kingdom, but they have a self-rule, and they've had it since 2009. And they have their own parliament. And it's funny, you bring it up right now, they have their elections right now. And of course, they also have 6 or 8 different parties, and some of them are leaning more towards a complete independence from Denmark. I think they're going to have certain issues, though, and I'm sure we're going to get into this with the conversation, but about a third of the income that they have on Greenland is essentially a subsidy that they get from Denmark, somewhere around $600 million. There are only 56,000 people that live up there, but it's an enormous continent, or it's not a continent, it's an enormous island, 50 times bigger than Denmark itself, with only 56,000 people. Denmark has had 1 or 2 military ships up there. They've had what they call the Sirius expedition, which is essentially like a dog sled with 8 soldiers patrolling the whole continent. And of course, then I think since World War II in the United States has the Thule, it has another name today, I'm forgetting it, but they have the military base. It's called a space station today, but it is essentially a military station. So I read a poll this morning saying that 80% of the people on Greenland are supporting complete independence from Denmark. It's a nation that depends almost entirely on Denmark and fishery. And if Denmark disappears, they're going to have to find somewhere to replace that lost income, so to speak.
I know somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere, America.
Yeah.
So I think Cody and I have spoken about this before. Probably what Trump is doing, he is anchoring, meaning saying, I'm going to take the whole place, whether you like it or not, and then he's going to be willing to strike a deal. So I don't think that this is not something that's going to happen overnight. Maybe it is. I doubt it's going to happen. The guy who wrote the self-rule constitution, so to speak, for Greenland said it would be a 10 to 15 year transition if they ever tried to break free from Denmark. They basically control everything except for their defense, their foreign policy, and the judicial system, so the legal system. Supposedly there's a lot of minerals up there. Supposedly there's a lot of oils up there. They don't have the resources to exploit it. They don't have the knowledge. So they're going to have to make alliances. And on top of that, they also don't have the infrastructure. So it's going to take heavy investments before they're going to be able to replace the income that they will lose in the event that they free themselves from Denmark. And of course, in Denmark, $600 million is a lot out of the Danish budget, but for the American budget, it's not that much money. That being said, the Greenlanders say that they're not for sale. I don't think that they would want to be absorbed. I do think that they're willing to enter into a strategic, some sort of a resource alliance, or letting U.S. companies come and exploit and earn a royalty. I know that they rejected a Australian mining company that had Chinese investors. They were rejected from doing business there. But other than that, I don't have any other intel. But it will be interesting to see.
What do the Danes feel? Like your Danish friends?
Okay, I would say the average Danish person on the street does not think about Greenland 3 times in a year. That's just my honest opinion. It would be like asking Americans in New York, what do you think of Guam? And I don't think a lot of people are thinking a whole lot about Guam. I think that it's a small society. When I was a kid, they were seen, they're basically natives. They're Inuits. Their blood is shared with the people in northern Canada. I think you could find similarities in Siberia. And they have this weakness for alcohol. And when I was a kid, they were always seen on the street as being drunks and hanging out by the lake or the river full of bottles. And alcohol consumption has diminished itself tremendously. You don't really see them. Maybe if you go to Copenhagen, you could find them. I know a lot of young people are trying to get off Greenland. They have one of the highest suicide rates among teens in the world. And they are trying to leave the island and come to Copenhagen and educate themselves. And they see a better future for themselves that way. But I think the average Danish person does not think a whole lot about it. Maybe they think they're kind of a burden because we just send money that way. We don't get a lot in return. And I would say 99% of the mainlanders from continental Denmark have probably never been to Greenland, and they couldn't name you the second largest city on the island. So they all know that Nuuk is the capital, the city of Good Hope, but they wouldn't tell you what the second one is. So I think that...
Do you know?
No. There are about 17,000 people living in Nuuk, and the second city is about 3,000 or 4,000 people. And I think the top 20 city has about 400 people living in it. So they're tiny little villages.
Probably the U.S. military base is the second biggest one, right?
I don't think so. We could look it up, but
fact check that shit.
So I don't think I do think that it has gotten a lot more attention. I think the people in Denmark right now, after Trump mentioned it all the way back in 2019. He said that we're going to take it, we would want to buy it. And they offered to buy it after World War II, I think, for $100 million, and nothing ever happened. But I think now it's more top of mind for the Danes. And if anything, I think Danes are offended that an ally would even tell them that he might think of taking this territory away from them. So I think that's what's going on in their head right now, more than thinking about natural resource. I think 4 or 5 years ago, nobody knew that there are natural resources up there. I mean, I'm referring stereotypical to the average Dane, right? Yeah. So now it's more top of mind for the people, but overall, it hasn't been in the last many, many years.
Well, after Canada and Greenland, Denmark can be the 53rd state if you guys want.
Is Puerto Rico a state by now?
They're just some sort of territory.
Not yet. Well, super interesting. I want to shift a little bit towards markets and what's going on, because it's been a big week in the markets. You know, the U.S. stock market has had a massive sell-off, lost almost $4 trillion in value in the last week or 10 days. Tesla lost about $125 billion off its market cap in just one day. NASDAQ had its biggest one-day slide since 2022. The S&P 500 shed over $4 trillion in value in just under a month. And crypto has also sold off massively. Bitcoin has been the least of the sell-off, but still it's down almost 25%. And then some of the other coins have gone off, 80 to 90%. That's all in despite of a very, very pro crypto administration, right? There's been a Bitcoin reserve announced. So the Trump administration created a U.S. strategic Bitcoin reserve. That means that they're holding on to a large amount, of over 200,000 Bitcoins that they obtained through various means, mostly like law enforcement actions. And the idea is just to keep this instead of selling it, which is a break from previous ideas. And then also, there's been a big shift in the support of stablecoins. So the Trump administration is actively supporting stablecoins, especially those that are backed by the US dollar. And they're working on a clear regulatory framework for stablecoins, including supporting legislation in Congress to provide regulatory certainty for all dollar-backed stablecoins to make it easier to do business using stablecoins without worrying about some laws. And then the last part that's been interesting is that it's very clear that they're signaling there's no central bank digital currencies are going to be created during the Trump administration, and they prefer stablecoins instead. So this massive dump has happened. I'm interested, Cody, what are your thoughts? Is this the start of this massive recession that people have been predicting for years, or is this just a blip and something that's going to kind of rip right back as the pro business, administration continues to do their thing?
Is Peter Schiff and maybe Robert Kiyosaki going to have their day? The doomsdayers, are they finally right? I don't think so. I think everyone watching the markets, whether you're in Denmark, Colombia, the US, and most people are invested in the US somehow. It's pretty frustrating watching the volatility happening in the White House, meaning the messaging. One day it's this, one day it's something else. And the markets are whipsawing back and forth more or less in reaction to the narrative that's coming out of there, and not so much the actual policy. Of course, the narrative is supposed to be preceding the policy. So we don't really know what's going to actually happen, but clearly markets don't like this up and down. So my first thought on the markets themselves, meaning US equities, stocks, and some global equities, is that, of course, I don't want to see this, but we need this. We need a pullback. We need a pullback in valuations badly. If this were as bad as it's going to get, or maybe a little bit worse, it would be a very good thing for markets as a whole. And the reason why I think you put this stat up is that the S&P is around currently right now 20 times forward earnings right now, compared to the long-term average of about 16. So we're still above the long-term valuation average, but last month we were way above. So the point is, this current pullback in the equities markets is something the world and the US really does need, because the longer we go off into these crazy nosebleed valuations, the harder that correction is going to be. So I don't want to say this is a good thing, like, oh, thank God Trump is making all these crazy statements and whipsawing the market, but something needs to happen here where valuations cool off. So if this is the time valuations cool off, great. Okay, moving to cryptocurrency real quick. I think this is just a complete reaction to the markets. And you just mentioned all of these really positive things that have come out in the past really 14 days. We got Bitcoin Reserve. We got this new vote on the stable coins. We even have a lot of private companies and public companies making really bullish announcements. Coinbase is about to introduce 24/7 futures trading. MicroStrategy just announced another like $20 billion purchase of Bitcoin. So if you were to look at the Bitcoin news and not the price, you would say this is the most bullish moment it's ever been in its entire life. But if you look at the price action, you're thinking, oh my gosh, we're in the hurt box. I'll throw a couple charts up here for those watching on YouTube of the rainbow price chart of Bitcoin, as well as the MVRV, which basically shows the relative value based upon past cycles. The relative value of Bitcoin is actually, if you just looked at the charts, not taking into consideration just the price, it's a really good value. And we have not come anywhere close to being towards that super high value or nosebleed territory that we've seen in past cycles. So I think there's a possibility later this year, maybe even to 2026, if the US markets clean themselves up, we could see crypto markets roaring back. Really roaring back. And the current correction in crypto is actually one of the least largest corrections of all cycles. So previous cycles, specifically in crypto, have had much larger pullbacks than we are in right now. And again, I think this, to summarize it, I think the markets need this pullback. I don't necessarily like the feeling of it, meaning it was a drastic pullback, but we need this eventually. I don't know, Patrick, what do you think? as somebody who's an active investor, but also kind of sitting outside the U.S.
I think, well, one thing is crypto, the other thing is the equities market and the bond market, without being an expert on this subject at all. I think the U.S. government needs to refinance about $7 trillion worth of debt this year. And I think Trump is trying to be strategic and trying to lower the rates before he finances and locks that debt up. So that's just one statement on that side. So I think there's some sort of manipulation going on purpose that is going to favorize the U.S. economy long term.
So you think Trump is maybe trying to crash markets strategically so he can justify lowering rates, then refinance that $7 trillion, lock in that debt lower, and that takes care of that huge future debt obligation?
Yeah, that's a strategy. He's a businessman, and I could see that being one strategy. I'm not saying that's what's going to play out. I'm just saying of all the strategies that I've looked at and heard from different commentators, that's the one that makes the most sense for me, because he doesn't like to see the stock market bleed. He was, he's always pumping himself on saying, hey, I left the best economy, the highest stock market, et cetera, et cetera. And I think he's going to try to do the next this thing again whenever he leaves office in 4 years. So I think it's short-term pain, but I think overall long-term, I think his main objective is to make sure that the economy is healthy and to make sure that people get their pumps on the stock market as well, and as well in crypto. And like you said, crypto has corrected, I think 50, 60, 70, 80, even 90% previously. So what, a 20, 30% pullback right now? I don't see it as a reason to panic. I would say if you're dollar cost averaging, just keep doing it and just keep going.
Yeah, I think one thing the way of thinking about the broader markets, which is crypto, equities, everything basically, is that the world, and especially the US, has been on this printing money, cheap debt train. And we're like a drug addict. We're like on this super high, and then Trump's coming in and pulling away the drugs. And Doge is cleaning up all kinds of stuff. We're uncovering all kinds of corruption. And it's not even a left or right thing. It's just like it's been going on for years. And we're like in this withdrawal right now. We're having this withdrawal, like we need our fix. And withdrawals from any type of drug addiction are very, very, let's just say, painful. And maybe we're at the beginning of this withdrawal moment. So I hope it doesn't get worse, but I think there's a possibility we could have a lot more pain in the short term.
Sure, it's painful short term, but I think if you are like me, if you're like you, maybe Austin, you have a 20 or 30 year time horizon, so to speak. Ideally, right? Before you have to retire, before you have to pull your stuff out of the market, if you're investing through a self-directed IRA or whatever you may have. So I think these bumps in the road are sort of normal. I don't see it as a reason to panic overall. I don't see the next financial crisis brewing, so to speak. That he would not want that as part of his legacy. And Trump is doing this to, among other things, build his legacy.
I think the main thing might be to build a legacy. I think one of the things that's interesting is, to your point about refinancing the debt, something he's talked about. He talked about in the first term and wasn't able to get it done as much as he wanted to. And if you think about it through the lens of a real estate mind, right? He's very much a real estate mind. It's like you want to refinance all your properties at low interest rates and then hold them for as long as possible. And it's the same thing with, if you put the US in the context of like all your real estate holdings, you want to refinance them all at low rates and then pay them off at lower rates rather than higher rates, because right now we're servicing massive amounts of debt. And I think it's going to be really challenging though. I wonder if he's going to be able to pull it off, because it's one thing to have a strategy where you, quote, intentionally crash the economy, lower the rates, and then come out of it. And then the other thing is actually pulling it off, right? And there's a lot of second order consequences that come from messing around and trying to change the dynamics of the economy. And also a lot of the growth that's come from the last 8 years was from growth in government spending. And if that's going away, you're going to have pain in the markets. So on a long-term horizon, I'm as bullish as you could ever possibly be about Bitcoin. But yeah, in the short term, it's quite challenging, because just about a month ago, we were at like euphoria levels of highs, and now we're not.
Are you buying more right now, Austin?
I wish.
Have you seen that meme? There's like the meme where there's two lines. We'll throw it up here where there's like the line of buyers at 100K and then there's a line of buyers at whatever 80 or 70K and like there's nobody in the line. And then there's the other meme where there's like, it's like buy more Bitcoin and the guy's like, with what? Like I don't have any more money. Like I'm tapped out. I think that's most crypto holders right now.
It is. I mean, it's like if you've been bullish on it, you put everything in, or not everything, but put a large chunk of your net worth into it, and that's played out really well for the last 10 years.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Patrick, and this relates to crypto. We didn't plan on talking about this, but I want to. This is kind of a hack, or I don't know if you can talk about this. So let's dive in. The crypto scene in Colombia and a lot of other countries. There's more or less like this laundering operation going on where you can. What is it? You sell cash, like hard hat cash, to get stable coins or Bitcoin. Like, how does that work? Can you explain that, how that works in Colombia? I know you
okay
about it.
I'll give you the laydown without mentioning any names.
All right.
So what happens is that Colombia imports a lot of products from China. And the value of the container... China. And the value of the container is what's on the bill of loading, basically, the one that arrives at the port. So let's say you have $100,000 worth of goods in a 20-foot container, and the authorities know that they're going to slam that with a 35% import tax, so to speak. So you get the Chinaman to lower the value on the bill of loading to $50,000, and you pay the 35% taxes on the $50. And then on the black market, you use your cash from your cash operation over here, because there's still a lot of cash in circulation over here. You buy USDT, and you send the Chinaman the remaining $50,000. So essentially, you're saving 35% of $50,000 in import taxes. And that is let's just say I have a contact in downtown Cali who basically told me he could bring me up to $1 million in cash, or he could launder $1 million in cash in less than an hour. Like he shows up either with a suitcase full of money, and you either give him money and he'll give you crypto, or vice versa. So it is a very thriving economy, so to speak. I think the authorities...
But there's a spread there, right? Like let's say you're paying $100. Yeah. I have $100 cash and I want to buy USDT Tether. Like he's not going to give me $100. Like he makes money on that, right?
Yeah, there's a spread of about 3%.
Okay, so I pay him $97 in cash, I pay $100 in cash, and he gives me 97 in USDT.
Yeah, basically, or the other way around, depending on how you want to do it. So yeah, this is not a secret. The authorities know very well that it's going. It's just very, very hard to track down. So when they open a container, and thousands and thousands of containers come into port, of course, they don't have time to check them all. So they scan them, and then they look at the bill of loading, and they say, okay, they have a reference, and then they have a database where you say, okay, this Toys R Us, whatever, tricycle, has a market price of $50. So they have some sort of references, and they can see if the bill of loading is showing a value that's completely off charts. And then sometimes they're going to have to grease some palms in order to make sure that the transaction goes through. Or in the worst case, they can get fined, or in the very worst case, they could get their merchandise confiscated. So, but that's basically the way it works.
And Austin, back to your point, which you've been talking about, one of your predictions for 2025 was the explosion of stable coins. Of course, we're talking about blockchain, cryptocurrency-based stable coin. But we have a vote this week in the US about stable coin regulation. And I think your prediction, Austin, is probably going to come true. I think Tether is going to have some problems because we just discussed there's clearly laundry going on around the world. And then USDC, which is managed by Circle, and other more regulated stable coins are probably going to get some serious traction this year because governments are in the best interest to lock this down. But they also have got to acknowledge this is happening. So they've got to somehow, go in the middle there and allow this to happen. So I think you're right, Austin. Like this is going to be the year of stable coins.
People continue to use, for sure. I mean, the ability to transact is going to go up. And I was listening to the co-founders of Stripe talk about how they're going to make it easier and easier launching their own stable coin to be able to transact and do business to business with stable coins.
So I just bought a car yesterday, and
stable coins.
I went to pay cash, and this is my argument for why stablecoins are the future. You do a stablecoin transaction, everybody done it with crypto. You're talking seconds if you're using a blockchain like Sui or Solana. I'd say the longest stablecoin transaction, if you're using a slower blockchain, is 5-10 minutes. Anyways, I went to buy this car and I had to wire money from a bank to the dealer. It took me like 5 hours. So I'm sitting at the dealership, like on phone calls, but just waiting for this archaic system to go through, the archaic Swift system, and put all the laundering aside, all the bad stuff about crypto. It's so clear to me the stablecoins are the future, because the old system, which is what we currently use, it just doesn't work. It's too slow. It's archaic. It's very cumbersome, and it just slows things down. So stablecoins, let's go.
I would like to add to that Denmark has an incredible efficient banking system where I can transfer from one bank to another, instant payment, and it costs $1. And if I want to do it for free, it's next day transfer, meaning I transfer the money today and you have it tomorrow and it's for free. So I think the United States are light years behind when it comes to banking and transactions and that. And just as a final remark, like if people are thinking about, hey, Bitcoin, have I missed the boat or whatever, you can follow the fear and greed index. And I think that is the easiest way for people to time the market, like people that don't have any experience whatsoever. So if the fear index is less than 50, you can buy, and when it's above 80 or 90, you can sell. And I think it's a pretty foolproof way for a beginner investor to dip their toes without feeling like they're being oversold or being screwed.
You know what it is today? Right now,
I haven't looked.
It's 15 right now. It's
Great
literally the lowest it's been. I'm on Coin Market Cap right now, and they've tracked it since the beginning of like 2023. It's the lowest it's ever been right now, which is pretty wild. So
maybe there's blood in the streets, right?
That's right, baby. Buy when there's blood in the sheets, blood in the streets. Don't do that.
What? So I want to wrap it up with a little adventure corner, because you've told some stories of pretty gnarly adventures you've been on, and I know you do a lot of adventuring in Colombia. What's your favorite thing to do in Colombia? What are some things in Colombia that are exciting that people might not know about? Adventures, things that you like to do. Reasons to come to Colombia to do exciting stuff. I mean, one of the things you just went on was this epic hike with Cody. What else do you love down there?
Okay, so I think it depends a little bit on what kind of adventure you're looking for. Like some people love the beach and the warm climate. Cody is the kind of person you have to pull him up the mountain. He hates the cold. He's proud of himself afterwards, and everybody else, you got to pat his shoulder and say you did well. But he didn't really like it. So I kind of like it all. I like, just from my house, we can go up behind the house and jump in the river. We have waterfalls and sorts. I can jump on my dirt bike and literally ride from hours and hours straight out the door. So those are small little luxuries that I have on a daily basis. For the bigger adventures, so to speak, I think the volcano hiking is definitely up there. The one we did is supposed to be the second most challenging one, and it was not an easy feat, and I think Cody would agree. It's not for beginners. If you're looking for something more tropical, that could be a cool thing. You can come down and do whale watching out by the Pacific coast. There's a season from July to October, more or less, every single year where the humpback whales come. There's also a place called the Black Sand Lodge. I haven't been there, but it's on my list where you can go sports fishing out in Chocó, which is one of the wettest and most tropical places on the planet. It's jungle out on the Pacific coast, and there's a little lodge. You can look it up. It looks pretty
big time tuna fishing, or what do they fish out there?
Yeah, tuna, sailfish, among other things. So game fishing. I think the Amazonia is an easy flight from Bogota. It's about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and you got all sorts of adventures down in Amazonia. It's on my bucket list as well. If you're into kite surfing and other sorts of outdoors activities, you have the Guajira Desert up by the Venezuelan border. I did a loop around it on a dirt bike, which is absolutely amazing. It's an indigenous tribe out there called the Wayuu. And it's a little bit sad because let's say the society up there is economically depressed. But at the same time, the nature is amazing, and there are some incredible adventures to be had up there. You can go kite surfing, you can go fishing, you can go not donkey, but goat shepherding with the locals. You can just go riding in the desert.
That's on my list. I want to herd some goats.
Yeah, just be in the middle of nowhere. You have the Tatacoa Desert as well. You have, there's so many things you can do.
Great coffee, right?
I think, sorry?
Great coffee as well, right?
Yeah, if you like coffee, we got all the coffee for sure. Amazing.
I do like coffee.
Yeah. You have the border region up towards Panama. There's a place called Capurganá and Subsurro, which is a little bit complicated right now, especially because there's been a lot of Latin American, let's call them immigrants, trying to make it to the United States, and they cross through that region. But also an amazing place. I think Cody has been to Parque Tayrona, the mountains, Sierra Nevada Park, right outside of Santa Marta. Fairly easy flight as well from the United States. I think you can fly into Barranquilla, and then it's about 2 or 3 hour drive. And I think one thing that people maybe underestimate is how close this really is to the United States. Like 2 or 3 hours, depending on where you are, and you can be in northern Colombia and adventures out the door.
What's crazy is how big the United States is, because it is very close, right? And Cody's always like, we'll just go to Colombia. It's super easy. And I look, I fly out of Portland, Oregon, and I look at it and it's like 11 hours to get down there. And Cody's like a 2.5 hour jaunt. And it's
I think there's direct flights from Texas to like the middle of the U.S. But Portland's kind of out of there. But Patrick, you're not going to say that you're too humble, but you have majority of your properties in Cali, but you've got some pretty sweet properties in the coffee district too. Those big houses you can rent out. So anybody listening who wants like these big luxurious homes with a pool and like guest homes, and the view is insane, and the weather is like pretty cool at night, and the restaurant scene is ridiculous, and you can fly direct into Armenia or what's the other, Pereira,
Medellin, Bogota,
and you can. The rent there is super cheap, but you got to hit Patrick up. We'll share his information at the end here. But
just to give you
people got to get down there. It's insane.
Yeah, just to give you one example, we have one villa with 7 bedrooms right in front of the lake where you can go kite surfing and you can go wind what do you call them? Wind surfing, kite surfing, wind surfing. You have these party boats where you can just sail around and have a good time. You go swimming in the lake. This farmhouse comes with 7 bedrooms, capacity for 16 people, comes with 2 full-time ladies that will cook and pamper you like you wouldn't believe it. They'll do rodízio, like the Brazilian barbecue. They'll turn on the jacuzzi at night, the hot tub. We got steam bath, swimming pool, and of course, just amazing views. And it is $400 a night to compare. I think something similar would be easily $2,000 a night in the United States.
Let's go.
Well, depending on where.
Sure.
Up to 4,000, right? You're looking at crazy. Exciting. It's got me pumped for... First of all, Cody's been pumping Colombia to me. Pretty much every time we talk, we kind of come up with ideas. He's like, well, we should just go down to Colombia. And I was bummed because there was talk about going down there, not for the hike, for a different thing. It didn't work out. But I'm excited. Before we wrap up, I want to just do a little 50-mile walk update, because we have been talking about this in the podcast. I have now 2, 3, a group of 4 committed up here in Oregon, and found a great track to go to. So if you haven't listened to this episode, Cody and I have been talking about doing a 50-mile walk in the month of May, and in under 20 hours. And some of the context of this was in just 1908, Theodore Roosevelt challenged the Marine Corps with an executive order, all the officers to do a 50-mile walk in 3 days. They did it in 1 day. And then JFK, he challenged Americans, after harking back to the 1908 executive order, Americans and people in his government, to do this 50-mile walk. And then RFK Sr., the current RFK Jr.'s father, actually took this up and did a 50-mile walk in 1 day in the winter of 1963 in dress shoes. And this kicked off the ultramarathoning scene. And it's just it's a challenge of grit and fitness. Cody's got a group going in Florida, beginning of May. Patrick, are you going to come up and do this 50-mile walk? Or are you going to do it down in Colombia? Or where are you at on it?
Is it just like a little hike down to A1A, or is it like a proper challenge?
So in Florida, I'm a flatlander. It's gonna be, it's pretty miserable. I'm not gonna lie. I think I got a pretty good group coming. So if anybody listens in the area, it's gonna be gnarly. I did a test 10-mile walk a couple of days ago. Like I was kind of booking it. lessons learned. I got some chafage in some areas that I need to be aware of. And I think I'm going to do a shoe switch somewhere in the middle of the walk. But yeah, Patrick, are you going to fly to Florida to join me and do this? Or are you going to do it in Colombia?
No, I can't say no to a challenge. So of course I'm going to join you. The question is, are we going to be walking bare-chested in the Everglades among pythons and alligators? Or is it like, what kind of challenge is this?
I mean, I picked a path where it's like on roads where there's not a lot of traffic. Okay. And I'm going to wear like, a hat and all that. I mean, it gets hot here, dude. And when you're walking, like you can't walk slow. You got to walk with a pretty good pace.
Okay.
So
pit stop at the Cracker Barrel.
Yeah, exactly. We'll stop at like the K, or what's the
reload the Cracker Barrel.
Yeah, we'll stop at Circle K every like 5 miles and get some Monsters and Slim Jims.
All right, count me in.
All right.
Awesome, Patrick. Super nice to meet you, and thanks for coming on the podcast. I've heard a lot about you over the last year, so it's really fun to connect.
Oh, absolutely.
And any listeners, if you are interested in joining us on this 50-mile walk or just interested in learning more about it, reach out to us. Go to adventurecapitalist.com, send us an email, and we will get you connected. We're putting together a group of people. No matter where you are in the country, we're connecting small regional groups, people who want to do it together, or you can do it on your own. So thank you guys for listening.
And if you want to hit up Patrick's, any of his properties in Colombia, EXSTR.co. That's got all your properties on there. Super good deals, and go check it out.
I'm pretty excited about the $400 a night massive place with, jacuzzi in the coffee district. I brought up coffee because coffee trips are pretty interesting down in my wife's uncle. He goes down all the time to Colombia, and he's always bringing the best coffee back. And he's got one of the best coffee shops in Portland. And every time I drink some of the Colombian stuff, I'm like, I got to go down there and check
it's
this
superior.
out. It's very, very good.
Superior.
Yes. Patrick, thank you. We'll see you guys on the next episode.
Thank you for having me, guys. Great talk.